So for my normal viewers, this video is going to be very different from what I normally cover, and will revolve around pretty heavy subjects. I would just like to say this as a warning going forward. Children's horror is a very fascinating genre of film. When you ask someone what's the scariest kids movie they've ever seen, the usual answers are like Coraline, Monster House, Nightmare Before Christmas, stuff like that. That's not to say these aren't scary films, but the movie I'll be covering today is one I haven't seen many or anyone cover on the internet before. This was a film I saw at the age of 7, and it has affected me all the way into adulthood. The movie in question is called The Boy Who Was Swallowed by the Drug Monster. It was written and narrated by a woman named Sue Petit. Now this movie is in the category of short film because the runtime reaches just under 14 minutes, and it's not a film in the traditional sense since it's a part of a PSA campaign, but to me, it's still a piece of art regardless of the circumstances it was created in, and it has left an impact on me like very few films have. But before I get into the movie, I need to tell you guys how I even came across this in the first place. So I don't know how many of you grew up with this, but in the 2000s, my elementary school had this event known as Red Ribbon Week, which was a campaign meant to encourage kids to stay away from drugs. We'd have a regular school week, but we would also have assemblies or lessons in the class about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. A pretty noble goal if you ask me. However, the tactics they would use to make us kids aware varied in quality. It ranged from getting these people dressed up in goofy mascot costumes to tell us how bad drugs are, to getting police officers to tell us disturbing stories and show us pictures of people before and after drug usage. These variations of drug awareness tactics were not easy for sensitive kids to process, me being one of them. So in the first grade, when it was my class's time of the week to go to the school library, we were forced to set our assigned tables and watch a video related to Drug-Free Week. The moment the librarian said we would be watching a tape, I assumed it was going to be some dumb cartoon like, "Don't be a fool, stay in school, don't do drugs," but I can assure you it was much more than that. Now, without further ado, here is that video. The movie is a series of drawings that tell the story of a boy named Vince as a woman narrates his life in a poem of sorts. While it's not traditional animation, the art style of these drawings immediately put me in a tense state.
This is a story about a boy named Vince. He had a mom and a dad and a little sister too. He really wasn't much different than you.
They look like simple kids' drawings, but the amount of shading and detail within the faces gives everyone such a disturbing look. It doesn't help that the way the film makes up for the lack of movement is by doing slow pans and zooms, making you feel like you're being physically pulled into the drawings.
But one day something happened to his mom and dad. It was very hard for him to understand. They got a divorce. This made Vince sad, and it made him mad.
It shows how he really misses his dad, but while one day at school, he meets an older man who promises him a magic substance that will make him feel happy. This is also our first introduction to the drug monster.
But at first, it didn't seem like a monster. It was magic that came from a pipe. But what Vince didn't know was that a monster was waiting in the magic, in the pipe that he smoked. The monster would swallow him.
Now, if you can't guess, the monster is a metaphor for addiction. I'm old enough now to understand this concept, but telling a group of 6 and 7-year-olds that if you use any substance just once, you'll have a monster waiting to gobble you up is absolutely terrifying to comprehend. At the moment, the monster isn't very scary though. It kinda just looks like a blobfish. But as Vince becomes more addicted to drugs over the course of the story, the monster becomes more detailed in its appearance. The story goes on and it shows how Vince sinks further and further into his addiction. He starts stealing money from his parents, he starts flunking at school, and he's hanging out with people who smoke the magic pipe as well. That is until his mom finally finds out what he's been up to.
His mom found his pipe and magic one day. Drugs are bad, she said, and threw them away. Vince promised his mom he wasn't hooked. The drug monster chuckled to himself.
I've got him now.
As you can see, the drug monster is starting to form into a dragon demon thing, just laughing over Vince's shoulder. I think what made this so creepy to me as a child was not only the monster's appearance starting to change, but I knew Vince was eventually going to be eaten by this thing once it reached its final form, something I was dreading to witness since the beginning of the movie. The story moves on and Vince, no longer having the magic pipe because of his mom, becomes depressed and lazy. He's not showing up to school, and when he does, he just sleeps all the time. He's become desperate for the magic pipe again, until one day he's introduced to a new drug, that being acid.
So Vince bought the new magic. It was a tiny dot on a piece of paper. How good could it be?
He ends up taking it to his room, trying it out, and seeing what it does. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. This is where the nightmare fuel begins, and I as a child was forever traumatized.
Soon he saw bright colors everywhere. He opened his eyes and saw big butterflies in the air.
So he starts tripping out, but the music just makes this so unsettling. The art style also starts making some changes. While there's bright and vibrant colors around him, Vince starts to be drained of color, becoming black and white, symbolizing how any form of life he had inside is being drained away. And then it happens.
He felt strange, like he was floating, and everything got dark and scary. He looked down and saw himself lying still on the bed. How can this be, he wondered. Am I dead?
Look at this. Now, not only is this art style in darker shades getting extra creepy, but the concept of your soul floating out of your body without permission was starting to get too much for child me to handle.
No sound was there. What was that? Certainly not his cat. Something moved over there, coming out from under the chair. As he stared into the darkening gloom, a monster appeared right there in his room. Oh dear. It was the drug monster.
At this point, watching as a child, I felt my insides start to sink. My arms became heavy and my legs were shaking. What I was seeing was having a strong impact, and I was wanting to leave, but my teacher was gone, and the librarian was this mean old lady who said no to everything, so I was forced to stay and watch this series of events unfold. As Vince sees the monster in the room, he begins crying and screaming for it to go away, but the monster just sits in the corner, laughing at him. The monster tells Vince that he should recognize him and his magic because he is the drug monster, and this is his end.
He fixed his red eyes on the boy on the bed. The boy on the ceiling cried out, "Wake up! Run!" So the monster swallowed him whole. Nothing was left of the boy who loved his mom and dad and his little sis. The little boy was gone. The monster left the boy on the ceiling in his place. This boy only loved the magic of the drug monster.
This scene legit made me start to cry, or at least get misty-eyed. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. Even to this day, I think this is a brilliant way of showing how drugs not only take over your life, but completely change who you are. Also, the wording of the story is very simple to understand, but I think that's where the true horror of this story shines. Vince was no longer the boy who loved his parents, the boy who loved to play with his dog, or tell jokes, anymore. All he now cares about is serving the drug monster. I think when it comes to messaging in kids' movies, sometimes it's okay to be a little extravagant with it. Using the metaphor of a monster cursing you or gobbling you up once you've used its magic, I found extremely effective. As the story continues, it shows how his mom notices something is wrong and sends him to a place where kids like him receive help, aka rehab. Unfortunately, they weren't able to help Vince because the curse of the monster was too strong. He runs away from the hospital and begins living on the street. He gets this tattoo on his arm and begins trying to sell to kids the magic of the drug monster. However, the cops end up catching him one day, and the narrator ends the story like she's telling the tale of a boogeyman around a campfire.
They locked him up far away. And that is where he is, still, today.
So the story's over. And even though it scared me, I could at least rest with the fact that this was pretend. Drugs are dangerous, But there's no such thing as an actual drug monster, and Vince wasn't a real kid, so there's no need to... Wait, the video's still going.
Do you remember the picture of the little boy you saw at the beginning of the story? Can you remember what he looked like?
What?
My name is Vince, only I'm not little anymore. I'm 21 years old and I'm in jail. It has been 13 years since I first smoked the magic pipe.
So in a shocking twist, the story of the boy who was swallowed by the drug monster actually existed. This is a true story. And he begins to tell the audience not to go down the same path he did, warning about the dangers of the drug monster.
The drug monster can swallow your life. He will destroy your mind. He will destroy your family. He will destroy your future. I know, because he did it to me.
Just before the prison doors shut on Vince, it's revealed in the credits that the woman who narrated, wrote, and illustrated the video was actually Vince's own mother. That revelation crushed my soul as a kid. Not only was it his mother who told his story, but the fact that he was a real person who experienced these things because of drugs disturbed me to the core. It also doesn't help that if you do the math, if this is Vince at the age of 21 in jail, that means he started doing drugs roughly around the age of 8. Now, I've made it no secret throughout this video that this movie scared me as a child, especially the whole sequence of him tripping on acid. Even making this video and having to re-watch that scene in particular made me so nervous because of how I remember it affecting me. I remember after watching it that day, I hardly ate my lunch, or whenever we went outside for recess, I just went to a shaded area by myself to calm down. I have no idea if it affected anyone else in the class like it did me, but what I will say is that the video did legitimately scare me straight into never trying drugs. Seriously, all throughout elementary, middle school, high school, and college, I never once tried drugs. It never appealed to me to begin with, thankfully, but this film is actually a major reason as to why I never tried. Watching it now, it's not as terrifying, but the messaging and its delivery are still very powerful. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned some of the scariest kids movies ever made. While those are full-length features, and this is a short film made for kids in school, I don't think it takes the power it has away because it's still, at the end of the day, a piece of art in my eyes. In Coraline, while the movie is very scary and eerie in its direction, the message of being grateful for what you have didn't need to be presented in the form of horror. But it decided to do that and thus made it much more memorable in its experience. However, with The Drug Monster, it hits different not only because I watched it at such a young age, but the message of the danger of drugs in and of itself is a horrifying subject matter and must be delivered in the scariest way possible. I guess the reason I made this video is for several reasons. One was I wanted to revisit a scary memory of my childhood, and the other was I wanted to make people aware of this movie. I know it's definitely not conventional when talking about scary childhood movies or TV shows, but I feel like that was all the more reason to make a video covering it. If you haven't seen it, the link to the movie is in the description. I would suggest watching it at least once, and try to envision yourself as a small child watching it. It is quite scary when the bad stuff starts happening. I also want to ask, have you seen anything similar to this? Was there a movie in your childhood that you saw in or out of school that has affected you even till this day? Let me know and maybe I can make a video covering it. Also, in terms of childhood trauma from shows and movies, there are so many more that affected me. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So if you would like to see a series of me covering those, let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.